welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
How do you determine for yourself what to work on next in your personal growth journey? I sometimes look at life like a giant game of Minecraft. If you've seen somebody play Minecraft, or if you have kids, or you've played it yourself, you know that the world in Minecraft, when it's set to creative mode, it's a video game. You can pretty much do anything you want. You can build anything you want. There's blocks you set up and you can tear down, you can mine, and the entire world is customizable. So how do you decide what to do? Well, it's a lot of personal choice, a lot of desire. There are some missions and things you can do in the game, but if you're in creative mode, you just kind of decide what you're going to do and go build it. And I look at life in a very similar way. It's open to us. We have endless possibilities. Now we have some preconditions, like pre-existing conditions that we're born into, many of us, societally, physically, time period, technologically. There's some limitations. But inside of those limitations we're born with, we have a lot of options in life. So how do we know what to do next? How do we know, especially with something like personal growth, how do we know what to prioritize and where to focus? Maybe we've gotten to a place, we've finished one journey and we're like, what's next? What do I focus on next? There's so much I can do. How do I know what to do?
Well, and there's an abundance of advice that people are offered, especially now that we have every problem that we could possibly face. We have a Google bar that allows us to plug that question in and then get millions of responses back. And so in some ways, when it comes to our growth trajectory and our personal growth, the prioritization around it, we have too much information. We are waterlogged with it. There is just so much advice out there on how to take care of every avenue of our life that it becomes difficult not to just prioritize what we're going to do, but prioritize how we're going to go about it. Which piece of advice are we going to follow, and how are we going to determine what's leveraged? I mean, just look at the advice we give in our own podcast. So we're now 400 plus episodes in, and we've talked about models that help determine where you're at in your generalized growth process. And then we've talked about personality types. And then we've talked about phenomena that happens within those personality types. And we've discussed avenues like growing your auxiliary function or your co-pilot and getting better at that. But then we've also made sure that you have to make sure that your dominant function isn't lacking sufficient time and attention. Otherwise, you'll get dysthymic. But then at the same time, what if you're in a loop? And what if you have too strong a relationship with your tertiary or 10-year-old function? But what if you have just the right amount? And so then is the next thing you work on building that auxiliary function, or is it making it more balanced with your tertiary or 10-year-old? But then there's that inferior function. And what do we do about that? And we don't want to be too one-sided. So we want to make sure that we're dipping into that. But then if we do too much of that, then our dominant function is going to feel neglected and ignored. And then we're going to get dysthymic again, and on and on and on and on. So if I'm just using my cognitive function stack as my prioritization map for personal growth, even then I can get really confused. Like, what am I supposed to do first? How do I know what to tackle initially? If I get a piece of advice, do I follow it because it's telling me to go against type and I want to get out my comfort zone and stretch? Or should I ignore it because it's telling me to go outside of my type and I should only be focused on advice that feels like it's in conjunction with my personality type? It's really hard to navigate through all of this. I was talking to somebody at our most recent profiler training program, the 5-day live event that we run. And one of our students, she's an ISTP, and she asked me that directly. She says, how do I prioritize my personal growth? What do I work on next? And it was not an easy answer. I blitzed answered it. I tried to answer it in a way that I thought would make sense in the small amount of time that we had to talk. But I think it's a much more complicated conversation than just something that's 10 minutes. So I thought what we could do today on this podcast is we could discuss what are some general principles for how to prioritize your growth and development, and then how do you determine what to say yes to and what to say no to?
So the two big nodes we're working with here, and we've really talked about the one, I think, clearly, which is the notion I started off with, this idea of Minecraft. There's an entire world of things you can do. That's the one node we're talking about. The major node is the actions you can take, the things, the directions you want to go in life, or the things you want to do. But the other node in thinking this, the other big piece is, where are you now? Almost imagine a map, And we've talked about this concept in the past, this idea of a you are here dot. You can't really know where you want to go on the map until you orientate to where you are on the map in the first place. So that's why I think there's a lot of complexity here in that it's a discovery process as well as a movement process. You're constantly recalibrating, redefining, and locating where you are in the journey almost in real time as you're moving towards your targets. So not only are you picking targets, which I would argue are fairly arbitrary, they're very subjective and arbitrary. There's no instruction manual that came out of the womb with you. That your mom, she birthed you and then she handed you an instruction manual on how to operate your life. Here's what you should do. Now, parents try to give you some sense of that. They try to articulate to you what they expect of you, but there's no instruction manual that came out. And I think the same thing with the you are here dot. There's no manual that's going to definitely point to where you are on the map. So you've got these things that are already a little ethereal. They're a little hard to grasp. They're ideas and concepts and abstractions often. And there's so much just in what you want to do. There's also so much in how to define the you are here dot of where you are. You can do it through personality type. You can do it through career choice. You could do it through maybe biology. Like there's all sorts of maps and layers to describe the person of you. So that adds even another layer of complication, I think, in this.
Yeah. I think that the challenge we experience when we're trying to create an on-ramp to growth and development is what's the next lily pad? That's always the question. What's the next lily pad? We were talking about this in another podcast, this idea of when you get stuck in a process or a project, some of the things that you have to determine, do you have that dialed in? And maybe that's the thing that's creating a challenge. And we listed things like permission and clarity and how to and resources and motivation. But I think when it comes to our personal growth process, there's a very similar dynamic that happens that most of the challenge in personal growth is the upfront cost. We mentioned in that podcast doing like taking care of your body, getting in a workout regime, making sure that your body is as healthy as possible. This is something that has a lot of upfront cost. You have to change your lifestyle. You have to, in some ways, change your identity or your relationship to your own permission of how you get to behave. You have to routinize it. There's a lot of focus that comes down to personalizing whatever workout or health regime you're going to adopt for yourself, because only you know your body and you know what is in its best interest for the most part. I mean, sometimes we trick ourselves into believing something is in our best interest that isn't. So that's a challenge too. But also being honest with what we can expect as our outcomes and, how to tailor and personalize things to ourselves. I would say that this carries over into our personal growth process in all ways. Now, getting your body healthy is a personal growth project, right? You are growing and developing when it comes to your physical, sort of the soma. But that, I think, is a good analogy to carry over into our psychological health and also our emotional health. And I would even say spiritual health. All of these different arenas require us to do a really sober check-in of what our starting point is. So I think the first principle when you are looking at growth, personal growth and development, is to pare it down in a similar way that you would if you are trying to become more healthy with your body. And that is, are you in a tremendous amount of pain? So when it comes to the physical body, the first thing we want to focus on is how much pain and trauma are we experiencing right now? And that should be your very first piece of attention. How do you get yourself out of a place of pain? How do you get yourself out of a place where your body has experienced trauma and now it's getting up to a baseline of health? So I think an assessment or a sober assessment of all four of these categories, your body, your mind, your heart or emotions, and your spirituality. Which one is in pain? Well, your body it tells you you're in pain pretty quick, right? We've got a lot of receptors that go, oh, I'm physically incapable of doing the things that I normally would have been able to do before. Now, when it comes to your body, sometimes a person will experience something that is unable to be transcended. They might have an ongoing long-term challenge. They might have, an ailment or disorder or something physical that they really can't do anything about. If a person is experiencing Parkinson's, there's nothing that can be solved. It can only be managed. And some people are just dealing with challenges like that. But I wouldn't say that that means that that individual does nothing about it, right? Like they might have to work harder to have less gain than another person would, but they can still always be improving upon the situation. And I would say when it comes to the mind, heart, and spirituality, we might have something that created a limitation on how much we can gain in those arenas as well. We might have an ongoing challenge, something that just we just have to deal with. Maybe there was extraordinary trauma that an individual had to experience when they were in a time period where their brain was creating their earliest imprints. Maybe there was tons of trauma when they were toddlers or young children, and they were going through a time binding process. If that's the case, you might have a situation where you have to work harder than your contemporaries do, than other people in that specific arena, and you won't get as much gain. But that doesn't mean you don't do anything. It just means that you might have some folded in limitations. That said, I think that sober assessment means that we don't create limitations when they don't exist. Like a person can have a serious ailment, or another person can convince themselves they have a serious ailment, right? And they actually have more capacity than they're claiming for whatever reason. So that sober assessment means that we have to be honest about what we can expect out of ourselves, but that also means we have to be honest about what we can expect out of ourselves. If we can expect more out of ourselves, we need to own that. And if our ideals of where we can be are more fantasies than they are reality, that also needs to be acknowledged. But sometimes it's better to almost be in a fantasy place. Sometimes you fall hard, right? Like you wish you could be at a certain place. Like if I work out a lot, I'm going to look like a supermodel. Well, Antonia Dodge, will never be looking like a supermodel. So I have to be realistic about my expectations when I work out. But I can look and feel and better and ultimately improve my health better in a way that transcends my starting point. So I think the first thing is that sober assessment. Where am I at and where do I want to be? And am I in pain, like traumatized pain around any of these four categories?
I think it's really a great tool to find the you're here dot is pain. And what I hear you saying is, I mean, I'm adding more to this, but what I'm hearing you say is that's a good starting point. Identify pain in the body, pain in the mind, pain in the heart, or pain in your spirituality. Like suffering, pain in these areas acutely makes you aware of what's going on for you to triangulate your starting point.
Well, and that's usually our impetus to get going. Like oftentimes people's personal growth journeys start with just not wanting to be in pain anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And you'll get somebody who was like, well, my joints were hurting all the time. And I didn't want my joints to be hurting all the time. So I started, I changed my diet and I started working out and I started improving my relationship to my body. And now my joints don't hurt anymore, but I'm still working out because now I've discovered all these other benefits.
Yeah. I knew somebody who drank 3 pots of coffee a day and no water. And after 20 years of that, they started drinking water and was like, oh my gosh, my joints feel great. I have like more energy. I can think more clearly. I'm not feeling low, like down and like broken all the time. Like I feel amazing. I'm like, wow, that's what a small change in your physical body. You don't feel pain anymore. That's awesome. And I would say that with the physical body, this is the easiest place to see it because it's so visceral. It's so immediate. Like if your knee hurts, there's no abstraction about that. Like your knee is in physical pain. But if you apply the pain metric to the mind, the heart, especially spirituality, these things can be harder to get a hold of, to know where we are at on the map, to know what we have to do still.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to wind it back to type, because type is such a great model that can be expanded on indefinitely, I would say that the cognitive functions, at least as an analogy or a metaphor or a symbol, maybe more of a symbol, the 8 cognitive functions tell us 8 areas of our lives that we can use to almost like a map to identify the different areas of our lives. Now, you have to disembody the cognitive functions from how they're used on an individual level in order to use this as a map. So I'm not like understand that I'm almost talking about cognitive functions again as an illustration or as an analogy.
Sure.
But we have a relationship to our inner world and we have a relationship to our outer world. And personal growth and development is a combination of those two things, the relationship we have with ourselves and the relationship we have with the outer world. You could call this the subject and the object if you want to, but it's working on each of these things and then finding a tension point between them. And 4 of the cognitive functions are introverted, so they give us a relationship with the inner world, and 4 of them are extroverted, and that's a relationship to the outer world. But you could just think of them as the introverted functions are relationship to self, and the extroverted functions are relationship to environment, right? Or outer world things. And so of these functions, you've got the sensory aspect of it, which could be, one could say metaphorically, not in practice, not how they're used as cognitive functions, but metaphorically, if you're going to use them as a map or a waypoint on a map, you could say that these could be relationships to our individual body, like our sensory body and the kinesthetic, and then a relationship to the outer world, or relationship to our environment and how our environment impacts us on a sensory level. So our relationship to body and our relationship to environment could be seen as almost an analogy for the sensory functions. And then you have the thinking functions, which could be our relationship to our beliefs and our thoughts, right? Like an introverted thinking way. That's our relationship to our belief structures and how we see things, or like what makes sense to us as individuals, and the thoughts that we're going to obey. And so this is our psychological health. This is, we check in to see what our relationship to our thoughts are, to our psychology. And then you've got the extroverted thinking aspect of it, which is our relationship to our impact in the world. What are the projects that we're going to be a part of? How are we going to spend our time? Our time is a resource. How are we going to engage with the outside world? And what is our relationship going to be with how we spend our time and resource in order to have the impact that we'd like to make? And then you've got the feeling functions. You've got introverted feeling, which is my relationship to my own emotional health, right? To who, like how I feel about things, what's in alignment with me, and whether or not I'm doing things that honor who I am, and checking in on my self-care and my identity. And then you've got extroverted feeling, which could be a metaphor for our relationships with other people and our relationship to society, and how we're going to engage with the outer world on a relational level, right? Our relationship with our family, our relationship with our culture, our relationship with our community, and that sort of thing. And how healthy are our relationships? And then finally, the intuitive functions could be seen as a relationship with higher, like sort of more abstraction and higher ideas. What is our relationship to our opportunities? How optimistic are we? You can almost see that as extroverted intuition, which is our relationship to our possible future, our opportunities as we walk through the world, and how optimistic we are about what we can accomplish. And then introverted intuition could more be our symbolic meaning, the meaning making that we have, how much we are tapped into the meaning of our lives, and sort of the through line of the symbols of our lives, and how they strike us, maybe even on a spiritual level. And so again, disembody these functions from how they're used as cognitive functions, but just see them as 8 areas of our lives that we can use as sort of like a check-in point to see which area of our life is in pain, right? Are any of these 8 areas of life, are they a cause of suffering? Are they something that we believe we might have some trauma in? Or are we just completely neglectful of them? Are we not paying attention to them? And either through abuse or through neglect, they are in pain. And potentially, based on our personality type, we're going to be more connected with some of these elements than others. We might, if we're, a person who uses, say, extroverted thinking, that waypoint of impact on the world and the projects that we're a part of, when that component is off as a mile marker on the map, we might, because we are more connected with that space, we might feel that more acutely than somebody who doesn't have extroverted thinking or effectiveness as their, in the first 4 functions. So it might be that if we take them not just as a map, but we personalize them, we might be connected with these points on the map a little bit more or less, depending upon our relationship with the functions. But regardless, I would still lay them out in front of, a person if they're trying to figure out what the next piece of their, or next prioritization of their personal growth is. I'd lay each of these 8 elements of our life and go, which one is the one that I have the most pain around or trauma in? And then that routes back to the HAT model, healing, achievement, and transcendence, which is, we've done a couple podcasts, or at least one podcast on the HAT model, and then visited it multiple times for other podcasts. Healing, achievement, and transcendence are 3 sort of overarching areas of personal growth and development. And if you are in pain, or you have trauma and you are trying to heal from that, that puts you squarely in the healing element of personal growth. So then if you've got pain in any of these, the pain of trauma, then your priority should be to heal, right? And that's how we treat our body too. Like if I have twisted my ankle, but I still want to go running, right? Because I want to like make sure that I'm keeping my, my cardio up. Well, I'm not going to ignore the fact that I've twisted my ankle and then just go run anyway, because I'm going to damage it more. I'm going to focus first on healing my ankle, and then I'm going to get back into running, right? And that's just how it works, right? You just need to address the things that are traumatized first before you can get into a space of achievement, which is the second letter, A for achievement. And this is assuming you're at a baseline of healing, of health, right? You don't have any traumas that are causing you specific pain, but now you're seeking a sense of self-confidence. Now you're trying to figure out how to overcome obstacles to get to a place where you can build self-esteem and see impact for your hard work. So if you are not feeling acute pain or trauma in each of these 8 areas, I would now shift this map out of the healing area and into the achievement area. Do I feel like in each of these 8 areas of my life, I am sufficiently overcoming obstacles? I'm sufficiently figuring out ways to build self-esteem in these regions. I'm building skill and competence. I'm figuring out who I am in a greater and greater way. I'm developing in each of these 8 ways. And then if it seems like, I'm on pretty good pace, then I can grab this map of 8 functions and put it into the T level, which is transcendence. And transcendence is overcoming the limitations of self, which there is no limitation in the true Jungian sense of self, but we put limitations on ourselves. And transcendence, I oftentimes say taps into a more of a spiritual arena, but I would actually say it's more of a psycho-spiritual place where we can find elements of one-sidedness that we may have been blind to, weave in a more balanced perspective of who we could become, and then get past all of Jung's archetypes. We've talked about Jungian archetypes recently of persona, mask, and ego, self, or like the way that we define ourselves, even though it's not true self, and then shadow, which is the bad news part of ours, and then wholeness of self. Well, transcendence is a place where we can get past a lot of these limitations of persona, of ego, and of shadow, and then dip into a place of understanding wholeness of self, which automatically just has a spiritual connotation to it. And you can grab each of these 8 markers on the map and pull them into the transcendence arena. Am I too one-sided in any of these? Am I unnecessarily limiting myself and my being tapped into higher purpose? And you can even look at, like, say, I mentioned the sensory functions as a metaphor for our relationship to body and environment, but even that can be put into a transcendent place, right? Our relationship to our body can become transcendent. Our relationship to our environment can become transcendent. So this is not just an intuitive space. This is like a holistic space where all of these elements are taken into consideration.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show.
So again, the challenge, of course, is that which one do I prioritize? And I would say that I would put them on that timeline. These 8 elements in my life, are any of them in acute pain? No. These 8 or am I managing it if it's acute pain, but that I can't do anything about because it's just a situation that must be lived with? Well, then I still shift it into achievement. But all the while making sure that I don't overdo it in the area of acute pain that I cannot solve, right? Because it just simply cannot be. But I can bring all the rest of them into achievement. And what can I do? And what's the most I can do with what I have? How do I overcome these obstacles? Even the obstacles of acute pain that is ongoing. How do I overcome that obstacle in that arena? Sometimes just living and maintaining it is itself overcoming the obstacle. And then you get that achievement piece. You get the self-esteem and self-confidence and self-trust and worth in that piece. And then once you buff that up, then you go to the transcendence piece. And then you look at all 8 areas of your life and ask myself, where am I unnecessarily limiting myself? How can I discover more about myself and have that wholeness with joy in a transcendent way? And so that's just like an overarching 20,000 foot view level of the kinds of things that can be prioritized.
The other challenge here is doing personal growth in your life is much like a road working crew trying to fix a freeway. You can never turn the freeway off. They have to keep the freeway open. They shut down one lane out of maybe 4 or 5 lanes, or they shut down everything but one lane, and they work on all of those things, but they have to let traffic keep going through. And that's very much like our lives. Like, you usually are not in a situation in your life where you can stop everything to work on one area, whether it's personal growth, healing, achievement, or transcendence. You have to be able to work on it while traffic is still flowing by, which adds even more layers of complication. So we've talked about the dynamic nature of all of this, in that there's a you are here dot that's in constant motion. There's where you want to go, or what's, what you're going for, the growth you want to do. Then you've got the level of, whether it's healing, achievement, or transcendence. But then you also have this element of doing all of this while life continues to run around you. The kids still have to be driven to school in the morning, and your partner still wants you to check in and maybe take them out for a date this Friday night, and your boss still needs that report on their desk Monday morning, and you're also trying to grow and move in all of this. It's extremely complex. And I think also there's almost a 3-legged race element to this: transcendent, achievement, healing work, right? The HAT model, healing, achievement, transcendence, is as you start to heal, oh man, now I can run on my ankle. I mean, that's a literal example, but metaphorically, like, you start to heal, now you have more achievement ability because you're healing things in your life. Well, now you start to achieve, but maybe there's not as much meaning in that achievement. And so now transcendence comes in. You're looking for more meaning in your life. Like, one channel opened up opportunity, possibility in the other channel or channels to be able to work on. So with this constant dynamic influx, inflow can never be shut down while you're doing it. Nature adds a lot of complexity. And I think what Antonia's talking about is a fantastic model to look at this, taking all the 8 cognitive functions, not as functions, but as metaphors for areas of our life, and then laying them on that healing, achievement, transcendence model. Another way, as you were talking, Antonia, I just wrote some notes next to that healing, achievement, transcendence. It reminds me of another model we've talked about, which is the visionary, implementer, calibrator model. We did an entire talk at one of our profiler trainings a couple of years ago. I think also ended up as a podcast, the audio from that, where we talk about, there's different areas that we need. We might need a vision for something possible. We might need to calibrate what we're already doing, or we might need to make a plan to implement and get somewhere. And I'm realizing these kind of map onto the healing, achievement, transcendence. The healing part, anytime you're healing, you're really calibrating. You're calibrating what is to something different to have a different result in that, right? You're calibrating not walking on your ankle for it to heal, or wearing a cast on your ankle to give it support while it heals. So you're calibrating your behavior, you're calibrating your foot until it heals, both metaphorically and literally in that example. And for achievement, you're implementing, you're creating a plan and moving toward that plan. You're laying out, the plans you want, the way you want to go, what you're going to do to get there. And then transcendence is often a search for the possible, for the meaning in things, for the vision of what's possible in your life, or what you want ultimately life to mean for you. That's really the vision of your life or where you're going. So I think you can also look at it through that slice of the visions, the calibrations, or the plans or the implementations to get somewhere.
Yeah. I like all the models. So whenever I'm trying to diagnose or prioritize what I'm going to work on next, I mean, usually the pain tells me, right? And the pain point doesn't have to be acute pain and trauma like in healing. It can just be like, oh, this isn't working anymore and I'm super frustrated. So oftentimes life delivers to me what to work on next because this is the thing I'm super frustrated by. And also, that might not be the thing that needs to be worked on next. It's just the most obvious. So I still feel like it's good to not just go with whatever is like the next irritating thing, but to really take an assessment of where a person or an individual is at. And I like all the models. That's how I roll. So when I'm doing a you are here dot, I'm bringing in not just my type and my cognitive functions. I'm also bringing in my Enneagram type and my Enneagram subtype. I'm also bringing where I'm at in the model you just mentioned, Joel, visionary, implementer, and calibrator, and which thing I need to work on next. I'm bringing in spiral dynamics or Graves levels, right? And where I'm at in there. And not just my specific Graves level, but am I entering it? Am I exploring it? Am I exiting it? Am I ready for a transition? Is some of the frustration because I didn't pick up a lesson I was supposed to in a previous Graves level, and I need to go back and revisit it? So I like to do a cross section of all of these models, and every model I find, I collect, I put it as part of my "You Are Here" dot. Right, it becomes yet another waypoint, another center of the Venn diagram of all of these things running. But I don't think everybody is like that. I think most people need something that's a little bit more of a stripped down model, particularly in the beginning of doing personal growth and development.
Well, just the way we're thinking about it and talking about it, we keep emphasizing the "You Are Here" dot, the diagnosis of us and where we're at on the map. We're not talking about how to find where you want to go or what you want to do, which is an action you take, right? We keep talking about, well, just keep diagnosing where you're at. That's the conversation. You can see where we overvalue effort or energy put.
Well, and it goes back to the quote that we quote all the time on the podcast, which is the Einstein quote of, if you have 60 minutes to solve a problem, you spend 55 minutes defining it. And so we're big believers in getting a really solid diagnostic on what's going on for you. And also, sometimes that's just too much information. Sometimes that's just not what a person has the time and effort to spend on. I mean, who has the time to endlessly journal the waypoint that is them in, relation to the rest of your life? And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to introduce this idea of seeing the cognitive functions as map, way markers, as something that isn't just a cognitive function, but could be a metaphor for an area of your life. Because as a person who's already interested in type and interested in functions, most likely, if you're listening to our podcast and if you've been listening to it, then this is something that might make a little bit more sense. So just use that, right? Just find the waypoint of you on that map.
I almost see it like min-maxing a character. You've got like a character sheet and you've got these 8 categories for your character, metaphorically speaking, not literally as the function, but categories of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're just like a way of looking at all the elements of your life. I also love the archetypal model that Jung came up with, persona, ego, shadow, and self. Which one am I trapped in? I find a lot of pain is trapped in persona and ego. Interestingly enough, more pain is trapped in those than it is in shadow, because my persona and my ego are constantly trying to avoid the pain of looking at shadow directly. Once I get to a place where I'm looking at my shadow directly, I've usually sort of surrendered to the suffering, and I'm along for the ride at that point. But when I'm avoiding that suffering, I'm avoiding looking at the worst parts of who I am, then when I'm in persona, which is my mask, the slice of myself that I'm going to allow the rest of reality to see, or when I'm in ego, which is the spit shined version of myself to myself, a lot of times pain is in those arenas. And so I go into going, okay, so this is what my ego wants to believe about myself, and what's the truth, right? And can I look at it directly yet? And if I can't look at it directly, well, then I'm going to have to go at this sideways. So I like the idea of a lot of maps and models. And I also understand that not everybody has time for that. So my recommendation is to, first of all, the HAP model. If you're going to be a person into personal growth or development, as far as I'm concerned, that HAP model is maybe all you need. Am I in healing? Am I in achievement? Or am I in transcendence? Sometimes that is the best way to prioritize what your personal growth projects are. I'm in pain. I'm in a lot of pain. This is highly traumatizing. I need to heal, obviously. And so I'm going to go get healing tools. Healing tools are like physical therapy is a healing tool. Talking to a therapist, a psychotherapist, or a counselor, or somebody who is good at reaching into some of those more psychological or emotional traumas from the past. That's a healing tool. Anything that is able to address the pain points is a healing tool. And so if you're in a lot of pain, then you need to seek healing tools. Are you in an achievement place? Well, maybe an achievement tool is a coach or a item, right? Like a tool, an actual physical tool that will allow you to get something going. Or maybe it's building resource to be able to do the things you want to do. Like look for tools that are appropriate for the level of growth and development that you're at. And then transcendence tools are all a bunch of stuff. You've got anything from a psychedelic all the way to a shamanic drumming journey. Those tools are vast, and there are many, and they usually live in the spiritual realms. But whatever they are, they're transcendent tools intended to transcend the limitations of the ego. And so sometimes the HAP model is all you need, and you need to find tools within.
And the stretching of things not working out because you're using the HAP model, and it's the incorrect tool for the job. So, for example, I knew this guy who was very much into transcendence. He was a transcendence coach. He was really good at meditation, having people change their belief structures, all of this. When you ask him about his achievement plans, it was like, well, I just keep getting in the right energy. I meditate on it and it's going to just happen somehow. And I'm like, okay. And it never did. And it still hasn't. But I know this person and they're great at the transcendence, but that's like the hammer for them to use in the whole world. And I'm addicted to the achievement side of things, right? I'm much more likely to stick with the achievement than to dip into healing or go over into transcendence, which limits me because if I have healing work to do, I need to go into healing and to actual heal, not try to achieve my way out of this healing that I need, right? Don't just keep running on the ankle that's broken. I'll just win the race. That'll heal my ankle. No, it won't. You have to stop and go get healed. So I think we all have a little bit of an addiction or a natural proclivity, at least, at the least, natural proclivity, at the worst, an addiction to staying in one of these three categories and trying to use it to solve the challenges of the other two.
Yeah. You can tell when somebody is stuck in healing because they have an external locus of control. They don't believe that they have the ability to make changes in their life. They think that they're at the will of the rest of the universe. And so if you have a really strong external locus of control, you're probably somebody who is stayed in healing for a little too long, and you probably need to get some achievement under your belt. That said, the next layer of this, okay, so what do I focus on? The prioritization, use whatever model makes the most sense to you, but these are the models that make the most sense to me, and get a good diagnostic of where you're at. And be humble and modest specifically. Modesty is not thinking more of your abilities, but it's also not thinking less of your abilities. So make sure that you're taking an accurate assessment and try to be really intellectually and emotionally honest when you're in this assessment piece. The next thing is, what tools do I use? Do I use tools that get me out of my comfort zone as my type, or do I use tools that appear to be within the realm of my type? So the person who asked me this question was an ISTP. And they said that every time they went and talked to a counselor, they were really pushing a lot of emotional work. And they're like, I don't think that that's my challenge. I mean, yeah, I probably do have some emotional work that I've got to do, but I don't know if that specifically is my challenge. And going to an emotional place just feels like I get caught in a hamster wheel. I don't know where to go from there. And so I do think that our specific functions can be a good map. I do think that if somebody is recommending a healing technique that is outside of your comfort zone. Take, for example, if you're a thinker and you've got a bunch of emotional work to do, and that's where your trauma lies, well, then you're going to have to stretch. You're going to have to find emotional tools that are outside of your comfort zone. Even if they don't feel like they are conducive with how you're wired, oftentimes you need to use them anyway, right? Just do what you need to do in order to address the problem. But if you're in a time period of achievement, particularly, then I think finding tools that are more conducive to your personality type and your style, that's going to be leveraged. So in healing, whatever tool does the job, right? Because you're trying to get to a place of overcoming that trauma and that pain as soon as possible. So whatever the tool is for the job, go for it. For achievement work, use tools that are conducive with your type. Use tools that help you leverage and maximize how you're naturally wired, right? If you're an ISTP, you're going to want to go to extroverted sensing or sensation as your leverage point of growth. And make sure that you're not neglecting your introverted thinking or accuracy. But then after you've got those two really pumped, like two really strong arms, right? Then you can move into the relationship with your tertiary function and then try to balance that with your the 10-year-old with the co-pilot or the auxiliary function. So it's like we have, there's like a map for that too, right? To do type development in those type dynamics. So achievement, go with what leverages your natural talents. When you get into transcendence, now you're getting into a place where it's not just any tool for the job, and it's not just the tools that will help you specifically. It's now general stretching out of one-sidedness. Now you want to be a little bit more, refined with the tool you use. And again, if you bring those 8 cognitive functions in as a map, as a metaphor for the areas of your life, then it's not like, well, I have spiritual work and meaning work to do, so then I should be using extroverted intuition or introverted intuition to do that. Maybe. Or that's the part of you need to access. So when you use a tool that and try a lot of them out for transcendence that allows you to tap into that place, well, then now you found your tool. So it's more about sort of, you might have to go through quite a few tools in Transcendence because you're trying to find the parts of you that are in the cracks and crevices. You're trying to find wholeness of self, which may have been very much hidden from your view in the past. And so when you get into Transcendence work, it is kind of like any tool for the job, but it's not just any tool. It's the ones that really help you tap into those areas of your life specifically, and then help you find a more refined version of yourself, which will probably be outside of your comfort zone, because it's the entire point is to not be one-sided. So I think as you go through each of these areas, get really, again, modest, honest, intellectually and emotionally, and spiritually honest with where you're actually at. Make sure that you're not staying in each of these arenas too long to overstay your welcome, but don't understay. Make sure that you're getting a complete experience in each of these three. And then when you get to a place where you feel like you've got this three-legged race down, I think at that point, and I know that I'm speaking very abstractly here, but I think oftentimes when a person has done that much diagnostic and moved forward to do that much growth, oftentimes the next lily pad becomes very obvious. I think it's the on-ramp challenge. I think it's just getting into it that can sometimes be the challenge.
Well, I just realized and it's going to sound self-serving when I say this, but our programs that we've developed here, Personality Hacker, kind of fall in these two broad categories of understanding yourself and defining your you are here dot. It's hard to say that fast on the map, which is a lot of like the personal growth starter kits, for example. It's not really telling you where to go yet. It's just talking about some of the basics of growth for your personality type. Like the basics of an ENFP, my personality type. Like, how can I understand myself better? How can I do basic growth? How can I triangulate where I am on the you are here dot of my map of my life? I do that through either Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or whatever. There's like a bunch of basic programs we've created around that. But then there's topical programs around like career or relationship or our profile or training skills people can build. And I'm realizing we almost naturally, I never thought about this until we've actually had this conversation today, that our products and programs have kind of fallen into those two broad categories. Because I think there is a break between those two areas. One is more just getting a sense of who you are and what's possible. And then what are you going to do about that topically? And I think it's really important. And you can tell we put a lot of effort into diagnosis, like we talked about on the show, because it's so important when you really know where you're starting from. I think you're right. Those other things become more self-evident. If you can get really clear about who you are, have an encounter with yourself, and know how you're wired, how you're tripping yourself up, how your habits are informing your life, like all these things that make up who you are. When you know those so well, and you get layers and nuance to that, the path forward does emerge in front of you often.
A good diagnostic creates a good prescription, and a good prescription can sometimes solve a problem immediately. All right. This is illustrated time and time again in the show Dr. House, where they spend the entire episode, they spend 55 minutes defining the problem. That's what Dr. House is all about, right? They go diagnostic after diagnostic after diagnostic, and nothing works and nothing works and nothing works. And then finally they've got a good diagnostic. And then the last 5 minutes, here comes the prescription that saves them.
Yeah.
And so
the show's also about being an asshole and drug abuse. But.
Possibly. But I don't think it's like...
No, that's not the core.
Like...
That's the character of Dr. House himself.
Right. But I think that illustrates the whole concept, which is that you want to, if you take the time up front to really understand what's going on for you, then the actions you take afterwards are leveraged.
That's right.
And you'll see much quicker results than you would if you were just stabbing wildly, throwing spaghetti at the wall.
I think that's why we've taken the approach we have. That's why we use typology for a growth path. Because we looked around in our lives, we're into personal growth, both you and me, Antonia, and we'd get books and resources that are designed like a one-size-fits-all, and we realized that this is very unique to an individual. Like, to who I am as a person is going to inform how I grow. How can XYZ author around this subject know all the nuances of my growth? I need to access that information based on self-knowledge, not just because the bookstore has that book on the front because it's a New York Times bestseller. Like, it might not be applicable to me. I need to find the books and the resources, the materials, the tools that are applicable to me in whatever category I'm going for.
Or it might be applicable to you during a season of your life, but not another season of your life, which makes it even more complicated.
Timeline. Yep. So what do you think? You've heard this conversation. We've given some ideas on things to look at. Where are you at in your journey? We'd love to know that too. Are you on the you are here side, or are you more on the topical healing, achievement, transcendence of where you're heading next? How have you determined that in your own life? What is your personal growth journey right now look like? How are you making decisions about what to attend to and what to focus on in your personal growth journey? We'd love to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, you can leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your personal story of your growth journey. We want your voice to be heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. I say that every week, and every once in a while I break from my script to go, you should go leave a rating and review. The review part is the important thing for me because then I get to read it. Go do that. It is psycho-spiritually rewarding for me. So if you do that, it gives me a little bump.
You read some beautiful reviews recently to me that came, like some really long, wonderful ones, which is really cool.
Yeah, I love them.
So thank you to you, all of you that did that. I appreciate it.
You know what? I never take time to thank people for having done it. I only tell people to go do it or ask them to. But
it meant a lot. It really inspires me and keeps me going.
That's right. For those of you who have taken the time to write a rating and review, specifically review, thank you very, very, very much from the bottom of our hearts.
It fuels our energy.
That's right. And it's nutrients. Like you said, it's fuel. It's food for our souls. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave a rating and review for us on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And Joel, you went through all the reasons why our products and programs might be very high leverage for you, the listener. So if all the stuff that Joel talked about sounds good to you, if you want a general ability to create a you are here dot by understanding your personality type, or if you want to focus on a slice of your personal growth journey, go check our catalog at personalityhacker.com and see if there's a product or program that is right for you at this moment in the timeline.
When I said all that earlier, it was not intended to market, but it is fantastic marketing.
Yeah, good job.
So I did a good job in retro. I'm like, wow, connecting this idea that came up for me. And I stand by all of it. It really, honestly, I think these programs help you identify where you're at and then where you're going.
Yeah.
And it really depends on what you need in your life. But yeah it's fantastic marketing, isn't it?
Good job,
because
Joel.
it emerged. It wasn't forced.
That's right. Emergent marketing, what we're all about. All right. And so, wait, did I say all the things I'm supposed to say?
I think so.
Okay.
So that's where I say, I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.